All right. Hello, everybody. This is the video that is going to kind of talk through the Shakespeare Packet. If you just want to read the Shakespeare Packet, you're perfectly welcome to. But if you would like a little bit of kind of guidance through the packet, I am here to help. So, you should open the document called Shakespeare Packet. Up at the top, there is a picture of Shakespeare, and it says William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. So if everybody can just go ahead and find that packet. All right. Many of you have probably never heard of Bertolt Brecht or Moliere or Anton Chekhov. You will. We'll cover them all. But you've probably all heard of William Shakespeare. Now, Brecht and Moliere and Chekhov were also people who completely reinvented the theater of their time. But Shakespeare is unquestionably the most important playwright to have ever lived. His works have been translated into every language that is currently spoken on the planet Earth, and he is performed more than any other playwright all around the globe. Um, he was a playwright and an actor. He performed in the troupe that did all of his plays. And what's shocking about Shakespeare is he is so important and so famous, and yet we actually don't know a lot of things about him. At the time, he was just a playwright, and no one knew that he was going to become as important as he did. So a lot of the history has had to be placed together and like figured out like a puzzle after his death. So one of the theories that's really interesting is Shakespeare's known for writing really interesting, strong female characters. And since women were not allowed to do any acting at the time, many people wonder if maybe he, as an actor, was one of the people that played the female roles. Because that would explain why his women are so much stronger than the women in many other people's plays. So that's just a theory, but it's kind of interesting, and it might explain he was writing these great women because he wanted to play them. So as you scroll down, you will see the country of England. England is where they speak English, and that's important. Everything we studied in the Greek unit, or the Roman comedy, or the medieval liturgical drama, any of those things were written in other languages. So when we read them, we're actually reading a translation, meaning someone else took the ancient Greek writing and they know ancient Greek, and so they translated it into English. But when a translation happens, the person doing the translating always changes it a bit. Not even necessarily on purpose, but maybe they don't understand like the pun that was made or this little reference that was made. So they don't include it. So we can't read exactly what the ancient Greeks wrote. But we can read exactly what Shakespeare wrote, which makes his plays more accessible to us in terms of really getting what his voice was. All right, now we scroll down. At the time, the great playwrights of London had their own theaters that were built for them, and Shakespeare's was called the Globe. There is a picture of the Globe Theater. If you come down a little bit lower onto page 2, there's a big colorful picture right there of the Globe Theater. I want for you to look at that as we talk our way through it. If you go back up, you can read all this information as well. But first, I want to focus on the stage because the stage is designed in a way that allowed for the performances to continue going even when the set was changing. So you see where the two big columns are, and that's kind of a thrust stage, right? That kind of comes out into the audience. That's the primary stage. That's where big party scenes, battle scenes, street scenes would all take place. But at the back, you see those two white curtains. That's kind of a proscenium stage behind it called the inner below. So what they would do is they would open up the inner below, and inside of it, maybe you see Juliet's bedroom as she gets ready for the party. And then the party starts, so they close that. They close the inner below off, and then the party takes place on the main stage. Then, after Romeo leaves the party, he gets to her garden where he sees her up on her balcony. And if you look up above the inner below where the white curtains are, you see that second row. That is the balcony. And this area would be used for when Brutus and Mark Antony address the crowd in Julius Caesar, when Romeo and Juliet have their romantic scene. All of these things would take place on the higher up level. And then the next scene in Romeo and Juliet, Romeo leaves the balcony and he goes to see Friar Lawrence. So they could reopen those white curtains on the inner below, and now they've had time to make it no longer Juliet's bedroom. Now it's Friar Lawrence's cell. So having that inner below that could open and close, kind of a proscenium at the back of the thrust, allowed them to do set changes without stopping the entire play. The other thing to know about his theater is that the way people sat was dictated by how rich they were. And it makes no sense to us now because these people right here in the front, they look like they have the best seats, but they're actually sitting in what's called the pit. This is where the poorest people would sit because even though they had good seats, it was very rowdy and very dangerous to be in the pit sometimes. No women were allowed there. So if you had a little more money, you went over to the first balcony. You see that there in red. And the first balcony, there was kind of some safety because you're pulled a little bit away from the pit. So if a sword fight breaks out, you're probably not getting stabbed. Second balcony would be a little wealthier. And the third balcony, as you see, is the wealthiest. And you may say, but they have the worst seats. They do. But they also have the best coverage if it starts to rain. They also can be seen by the people in the pit the best. Meaning, if they're up there and everyone can see they're on the third balcony, they're showing off their wealth. They're trying to make a statement saying, I am rich enough to be up here at the top. So that very top balcony is where the rich people would show off how rich they were. All right, the next thing. If you have ever watched Shakespeare, or if you have ever read Shakespeare, you know that he writes most of his characters speaking kind of in poetry. And he has a few characters that are supposed to be low class that speak more like we would speak in prose. When you look at their lines, it's a paragraph, not a poem. But most of his characters speak in poetry, and they almost always speak in what is called iambic pentameter, meaning that there are 5 poetic feet, which is where we get the penta, like a pentagon. And there's 5 poetic feet, and the poetic feet are a badum. So there's 5 of those in each line. And if you look at this graph right down here at the bottom of page 2, where it has the little apostrophe, that's the part that gets the emphasis. So every line is going to be ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. So it's kind of like this heartbeat that's running through the play. And most actors don't just play that. They don't come out and ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. but it's there. And it's actually really helpful when you're trying to memorize it to kind of get that rhythm in your head. So there's an example. This is from the prologue to Romeo and Juliet. If you look on page 3, where it's bold is where the emphasis is. So you can hear it in from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Now, no one should ever step out and present it that way. But you can see that that ba-dum, 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 ba-dum is in every line right there. 5 poetic feet with an emphasis on the second syllable. Now, obviously, that comes into more of a from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. It's still got that heartbeat, not nearly as clearly as how I just read it, but iambic pentameter is this specific way that he was writing all of his plays. So he really had this da-dum, da-dum, da-dum all the way through. Next, we get to the types of plays. He wrote 3 types of plays, and they were so specific and they were so his that they all start with the word Shakespearean, meaning if someone else writes a Shakespearean tragedy, they are writing it in the style of Shakespeare. Shakespearean tragedy. You know what a tragedy is. It is a play where a major important character has to die. He wrote several of them. A Shakespearean comedy. We talked about this when we talked about Roman comedies. Usually comedies are funny. Usually they're going for the laugh and they have a joke here and there. But what's most important to make a comedy is that it has a happy ending. All the good guys get what they want, all the bad guys get punished, and everything ends up like it should. The final kind, and the play of the day that you have for this is Julius Caesar, is called a Shakespearean history. At the time that he was writing, yes, very educated, important people, including Queen Elizabeth, would come and watch his plays. But also uneducated people would come watch his plays. And he knew they couldn't go to school, they couldn't read, so he felt it was his job to help them know the history of the world that came before them. And he was also very interested in history, so he liked to recreate these stories. He wrote a play about all of the kings of England before he started writing. And then he would also write about some major people from history. So he writes about Julius Caesar, who was the emperor of Rome. And that's going to be your 4th play of the day in this unit. If you continue down that page, you see the first folio. Here's what blows my mind. Shakespeare wrote what are considered to be the greatest plays in the history of the world. But because everything was handwritten, he only wrote prompt books, meaning he would write Macbeth's speech, and then Lady Macbeth has a speech. So he would just write the last few words of Macbeth's speech in Lady Macbeth's prompt book, and then he would write her speech over there. Then he would go back to Macbeth's book and he would write the last few words, and then he would write Macbeth's lines. So all that any actor had was like 5 words that were their cue and then their line or their soliloquy. So the actual full play was never written out anywhere. And after he died, people started to realize, wait, this is a problem. And the actors from his company actually worked together to put together all of the scripts that they had and write them into one play for each of the shows. And then they published it in a book called The First Folio. And that is where we get all of the versions of the plays that we have today. Again, hugely important famous person that we know so little of the specifics about. And the first folio is what we have. We do know, for example, there is one play called Love Labour's Found that ironically was lost. So they didn't have the full script of it, they couldn't publish it, but we do have records that it was, in fact, something that was performed, but we don't know what it said anymore. Um, all right, that gets us to the last topic, which is why was he so great? You've never heard of Chekhov, you've never heard of Moliere, you've never heard of Bertolt Brecht, but you've heard of Shakespeare. Why is he, out of everybody in 2,500 years of theater history, why is he the one? There's a lot of reasons. Much of what he did became the way we tell stories today. So when you look at the Greeks, like Medea, we just see Medea the whole time. And Jason, of course, is living his life, right? But but we never see him unless he's talking to Medea, because that play, as great as it is, has one plot line. And we never go off and see what Jason and Glace are doing or see what Aegeus is doing unless he's talking to Medea. Shakespeare was like, okay, but don't you wonder what Jason is doing? Don't you wonder about what Aegeus is doing? So he would write multiple plot lines and they would intersect and they would go back apart. And so the stories became much bigger and broader. So that actually influenced how we watch TV today. If it was just one plot and you couldn't make your story bigger, we wouldn't have a Game of Thrones. We wouldn't have Empire. We wouldn't have Westworld because it would all still just be focused on this one character. But he's the one that said, no, we can care about all the characters and they can all get like a character arc and a full story of their own. Second thing is use of language. That iambic pentameter, he goes beyond just saying the words he wants to say. He goes into making the sounds he wants to make. There are Shakespearean scholars who say you can actually go through one of his speeches and just make the vowel sounds, not even the words, and those vowel sounds start to sound like the person is happy and in love, or start to sound like the person is like angry and dejected. So he picked words for their sounds, not just for their meanings. My favorite that he did. Lady Macbeth receives a letter from Macbeth, and she wants for Macbeth to get up the nerve to kill King Duncan, right? And she has this soliloquy where she's like, wouldst thou most highly, wouldst thou most holily. And she keeps saying this word wouldst, which is a weird word that no one says. Except when she says it, wouldst. She sounds like a snake. She's like, if you just listen to the speech and not the words, you still just hear. She hisses her way through it because of that contraction. And no other playwright was doing that. No other playwright was saying, but if I do this, then not only is she mean, she becomes a snake. The last thing that makes him so great is universal themes. Yes, his stories are kind of specific, but there's something we can all relate to. We may never have been Lady Macbeth or Macbeth and really, really want to be king and queen, but we have all really wanted something so badly that we're kind of willing to abandon our friends and we're kind of willing to hurt people to get it. Now, hopefully, we don't. We're not saying that the Macbeths are someone to try to emulate or be like, but we understand what it is to want that. And so we understand the story. Romeo and Juliet. We all understand what it's like to be a teenager and just have someone you really like, and they like you back, and suddenly that's all that matters in the world because we've all been there. So that universal theme is what makes it something we can all relate to. When you scroll down, you get to final thoughts. Um, I just always find this interesting. In the year 1999, they brought together a bunch of specialists and said, okay, 1000 to 1999, who are the 100 most important people to have existed in that 1,000 years? And you get tons of people. You get kings, you get presidents. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln are definitely both in there. Queen Elizabeth I, definitely in there. Um, and you get sports figures and you get um, early rappers who completely changed the world. But of everybody, the third most important person these experts agreed on was William Shakespeare. He beat out every visual artist, every musician, every actor. He was picked third because of what he did for how we tell stories. What he could do with his pen was that important. It changed everything about writing, everything about theater, everything then about TV and film, all coming from William Shakespeare. Um, Most students usually at this point say, well, who was first? He was third. Second place was Charles Darwin, who founded the theory of evolution. And first was Johann Gutenberg, who invented the printing press, thus making it where everyone could read. So they're important too, I suppose. But Shakespeare was found to be the third most important person of 1,000 years. And yeah, that kind of gets us through this packet. You're now going to watch all of the plays of the day, and you will have a quiz over all of this part. So I hope that was helpful. I'm trying to put these videos up so that if you want a review for the quiz, you can go back and watch it. Um, Let me know if these are helpful. All right. Thanks, guys.